Harvard Law professor Lawrence Lessig is running for president, but he's not doing it in the typical fashion. Let's hear him tell what his cause for entering the race is.
So here's the idea we're going to test. A referendum president. A candidate who runs for president making a single promise, that if elected, he would serve as long as it takes, but only as long as it takes, to pass fundamental reform to finally achieve citizen equality. Once that reform is passed, this president would step down, and the elected vice president would become president to fill out his term. The candidate is the referendum. The campaign is for that referendum. So I am asking you to help me crowdfund a campaign for a referendum president so we can give the next extraordinary president, whether Hillary or Bernie or Joe or someone else, a Congress that can represent us and a Congress that is free to lead. And if we hit our funding target and the leading candidates in the Democratic primary do not commit to making this fundamental reform the first priority of their administration, then I will enter the race as a referendum candidate. I would tie every issue in the campaign, from climate change to student debt, to this fundamental corruption.
So let me state right off the top my quote-unquote bias in favor of Larry Lessig. I know Larry Lessig. I think he's a great guy. This campaign is not about Larry Lessig, though, okay? And so, and my bias in favor of Larry Lessig is not born out of some personal friendship we have outside of this context. It's not like we play fantasy football together, and so I like the guy because of that. It's I met him because we both think the number one issue is getting money out of politics, and that you really can't do anything else until you fix that issue.
Yeah.
That is why I love this campaign, right? So it doesn't mean that if you like this campaign, you hate the other Democrats running, right? No, that doesn't mean that at all, right? It's just saying, hey, look, this issue is so monumentally important that you need a referendum on this issue. So that's why it's not about Lessig. It's about the issue. It could be anybody. In fact, he tried to get somebody else to run, you know, with a bigger name, et cetera, on this particular idea. And I don't see any way that all real progressives, let alone the 96% of Americans who agree that money's corrupting politics, don't support Lessig. So it doesn't mean that you don't support someone else as well. Okay, so when it gets to actual voting time, then we're going to have an interesting question as to which way you cast your ballot, right? And there's a long time between here and there. But for now, you got to say, hey, a guy who's saying, I don't want to be president, this isn't about my ego, right? And they all say that, but they never mean it, right? In this case, he's saying the minute this issue is resolved, I step down and my vice president becomes president. I know that sounds strange. That sounds like you've never heard that before. It is possible. He's a Harvard Law professor. It's not like he didn't think it through.
No, I get that you can resign. I mean, he says the elected vice president would then become president, but he still has to choose who his vice president is going to be. So they're not technically elected in that way. You'd still be, but so like, do you not vote for him if you don't like the vice president? So look, it gets a little bit complicated in the weeds if you think about it too much.
Right, but it's elected in this sense. If normally people will say, the pundits will say, oh, the vice president is fairly irrelevant. Like unless it's an enormous wildcard like Sarah Palin, it almost never makes any effect because the president is the president and the vice president does very little unless the president passes away. In this case, they would also be voting for the vice president because the minute the president accomplishes his mission, the vice president will be the president. That's a fact.
But again, that complicates it then because you would conceivably vote for him as the issue because you care about that issue, but then what if it's a vice president that you don't like? You want that issue, but then, oh shit, then...
But you're not going to
becomes president. Like
you're not going to get to that issue until the primaries are over.
That's the idea.
Okay, so so this is what primaries are for. Primaries are to hash out the issues, figure out what's most important. And here's a guy saying, I care deeply about climate change and reforming Wall Street, income inequality, all these things he cares about, he's fought for his whole life. An open internet. There's no one who's been a bigger advocate for the open internet than Larry Lessig. That's why he has the strength and the clout that he has. Okay, and with grassroots. But we can't get to any of those issues unless we do money in politics first. So if Bernie Sanders wins, and I like Bernie Sanders a lot, He's got all these great policies that he will not be able to enact because the system is fundamentally corrupt.
Well, really fast. Let me just read this one quote. There's a couple of specifics that Lessig would put into place if he were elected. The singular focus would be the passing of the Citizens Equality Act, a package of reforms that would guarantee the freedom to vote with automatic registration, end partisan gerrymandering, and fund campaigns with a mix of small dollar donations and public funds. So I agree with you. Devil's advocate, so Bernie Sanders has said recently, he said he would have a litmus test for Supreme Court justice nominees. They would have to vote to overturn Citizens United. He said he would try to reform the Voting Rights Act to get back in the protections for anti-discrimination, minority discrimination, stuff like that. He said he wants public financing of campaigns. He just introduced a bill for that. He would make a national election day. I mean, look, Lessig would go farther in terms of having like multi-member districts and proportional representation. He would massively overturn the way that we elect our Congress in a way that Bernie Sanders wouldn't. But many of the stated goals are things that Bernie Sanders has also said he wants to do. And in his speech, at least, he talked about them before he talked about most of the other issues.
Okay, so John, here's the part that is absolutely critical. Bernie Sanders, he says he would like to do all those things. Larry Lessig says, we will not do anything with government until we do this. To the point, and you might consider, a lot of people, certainly in the mainstream, they will consider it extreme. We're not going to talk about defense spending, and we're not going to talk about your agriculture bill, and we're not going to talk about any of those things until you pass this bill. Until you pass it, I'm not doing anything else as president. Yeah. You got to get me out of office, and you got to get the vice president in. Until you do this, I'm not going. Okay?
That might backfire, though, because if it's still a Republican Congress, they may be like, okay, let's not do anything for 8 years. Okay, they don't seem to fucking care.
But that would mean that the people put him in charge as president. So what the Republicans would then say is, I'm spitting in the eye of the American people. You were incredibly clear. It wasn't Bernie Sanders. It wasn't Hillary Clinton, where it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I don't know. Do you have a mandate for that proposal? The whole point of this is it is a mandate for you get money out of politics. If the Republicans then say, we're not going to do it, then they reap the wrath of that, right? Hopefully, it makes it crystal clear. That's the whole point of this campaign. If it was one of his many issues, then you're right. Then you're right back in the soup with everybody else. Oh, I kind of like it and I kind of care about it. My point with Bernie Sanders right now is, as much as I like him as a progressive, he is not going to stop everything to do this. And when he doesn't do that, he will not pass any of those bills. That right now, there's a ton of bills who say, well, let's say right now, let's do public financing, let's clean up elections, let's stop the corruption. They never go anywhere. Yeah, Bernie introduces them, Elizabeth Warren introduces them, even Chuck Schumer introduces them to raise money off of them in a super ironic way, okay? That doesn't mean anything. The question is, what are you going to do about it, right? And what Lessig is saying is, you're not going to do anything until we solve this issue, because then my vice president, whether it's Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, whoever it is, they won't be able to solve climate change and income inequality unless we get this done first. But if we do get it done first, then they can solve everything. Okay? So that's why he's running. I love that he's created it as a national referendum on this issue. And he's forcing the other Democratic candidates to get real. Not like, hey, I introduced a bill. Oh, shit, it's not going to pass like every other bill. Oh, well, I gave it a shot. No. What are you going to do to fix it? Not play around, not pretend you're in favor of it. We need it fixed. What are you going to do? And Lessig's putting them to a decision on that. And that's what I love about it.
Okay.
Go support him. Am I clear enough? Okay. Look, everybody has their own favorites. I'm telling you my bias in terms of not Lessig as a person, but in terms of the issue. Because if we don't fix this, we don't fix anything else.